the pitch-black night, a car drove down a deserted and barren road. Inside the car was a weary and irritable couple. Not long ago, their son had accidentally fallen down the stairs and died, leading to the breakdown of their relationship. The couple planned a long road trip as a way to end their marriage gracefully. However, midway through their journey, they got lost, and their car developed a minor fault. They began arguing again. Fortunately, they soon came across a small roadside repair shop.
Tell you what, pop the hood. I'll check the engine and make sure you can get that far.
A young mechanic enthusiastically fixed their car. But after driving just 1 kilometer, the car broke down completely, leaving them stranded in a place with no cell phone signal. They had no choice but to walk back to the repair shop for help, only to find it closed. The husband suggested staying overnight at a small inn nearby. Little did they know that this suggestion would plunge them into a horrifying nightmare. The story begins with the husband, David, and his wife, Amy. As they pushed open the inn's door, they immediately heard a sharp and painful scream of a woman coming from the office behind the front desk. Amy, frightened, suggested they spend the night in the car instead, but David insisted on ringing the service bell. A middle-aged man wearing glasses emerged from the office. It was the innkeeper. Seeing Amy's terrified expression, the man returned to the office and brought out a remote control. It turned out he had been watching a horror movie, and the scream came from the TV. Relieved, the couple quietly breathed a sigh of relief. The man then arranged a room for them. The room's facilities were old and covered in dust. Even the water from the tap ran brown with rust. The couple didn't feel like freshening up and decided to lie down and rest instead. Just then, the phone rang.
Hello?
Amy picked up the receiver, but no one spoke on the other end. Immediately after, loud knocking sounded on the door. David opened it, only to find no one outside. Both felt puzzled. Then the phone rang again, still with no response from the other end. At the same time, the loud knocking resumed, this time on the neighboring room's door. David assumed it was the guests in the next room playing a prank. He angrily told them to quiet down, but instead of stopping, the knocking grew louder. Furious, David went to the innkeeper to resolve the matter. However, the man with glasses claimed that apart from the couple, there were no other guests at the inn. He added that vagrants occasionally sneaked in to stay and suggested it might be their doing. He promised to personally check the neighboring room. When David returned to their room, the knocking had stopped, but Amy felt increasingly uneasy. She proposed leaving again, but David refused. Having driven all day, he just wanted to relax completely. David decided to watch a movie. There were some videotapes placed beside the TV. To their horror, the tapes were explicit and gruesome. In the movies, 2 masked men were brutally killing a couple. As they watched, the couple began to feel something was wrong. The scenes in the movie were clearly set in their current room. The layout, furnishings, and even the bed sheets and curtains were identical. David switched to another tape, but the scene was exactly the same. Only this time, the victims were a different couple. The two were immediately filled with dread. Searching the room together, they discovered cameras hidden in several corners. They finally realized that the footage on the tapes wasn't a movie, it was real-life recordings, and the room they were in was the filming location. It became clear that this was a trap set up by a sinister inn, and the mechanic who had fixed their car was likely an accomplice, ensuring the car broke down mid-journey. Amy tried to call the police, but her phone still had no signal, and the inn's landline was non-functional. Suddenly, the room lights began flickering, and loud, frantic knocking sounded on the door again. David searched for another way out, but the bathroom window, the only one without bars, was nailed shut. At that moment, Amy noticed something chilling: a single apple on the bathroom sink. She recognized it as the one she had left in the car because she had accidentally cut her finger while eating it, leaving a bloodstain on the apple. When they first entered the room, the apple hadn't been there, and Amy hadn't left the room since. Who could have placed it there? How did they get in? David didn't dwell on these questions. He was solely focused on escaping the nightmare. He turned off all the lights to hide themselves in the dark, cautiously opened the curtains to check outside, and seeing no one, opened the door and led Amy out. His plan was to hide in a nearby grove, but as soon as they stepped out, 2 masked figures blocked their path. The couple scrambled back to the room and locked the door. The masked intruders disappeared into the darkness again, clearly enjoying tormenting them. David remembered there was a public phone booth in the courtyard and decided to use it to call for help. He told Amy to stand by the bathroom window and pretend to pry it open to distract the intruders. The ploy seemed to work. David stealthily opened the door and made it to the phone booth. He managed to connect to emergency services, but to his horror, the voice on the other end was the bespectacled innkeeper. The next moment, a car roared to life and drove straight at David, smashing the phone booth to pieces. David barely escaped, drenched in sweat and panic, and ran back to the room. It was now clear that the phone booth was another piece of the killer's sadistic game. David soon realized that turning off the lights was futile. Their every move was still being monitored by the cameras. They couldn't escape or call for help. Their only option was to confront the attackers directly. With no proper weapons in the room, David broke a mirror and wrapped a shard in a towel to use as a makeshift blade. At this point, the couple no longer had the energy to argue or blame each other. Huddled together in a corner, they sought warmth and comfort from one another. Amy eventually fell into an exhausted sleep. When she woke up, she found David watching the tapes again. He hadn't given up. David realized that when Amy fell asleep, the intruders had stopped their torment, possibly assuming they had resigned themselves to their fate. Taking advantage of this lull, David blocked the camera aimed at the television and rewatched the footage. He noticed that the masked killers didn't break into the room. They always appeared suddenly from the bathroom. This detail reminded him of the blood-stained apple which had also mysteriously appeared in the bathroom. Convinced there was a hidden passage, David went to the bathroom and used the shower curtain to block the camera. After a thorough search, he found a trapdoor under the bath mat. At that moment, lights flared outside as a truck pulled into the courtyard. A dusty, tired-looking driver got out, appearing to be an ordinary traveler looking for a place to stay. Amy was eager to call for help, but David stopped her. They then saw the two masked killers approaching the driver from behind, knives in hand. Desperate, the couple banged on the window and shouted warnings, but the driver couldn't hear them and walked toward their room in confusion. As the killers closed in, David was about to rush outside to intervene when the bespectacled innkeeper appeared. He intercepted the driver and handed him a box of tapes. It turned out the driver wasn't an innocent traveler. He was a buyer of the murder recordings. Amy was devastated, but David quickly devised a plan to take advantage of the group's distraction. While the four were distracted, he pulled Amy into the underground passage. The tunnel was narrow but interconnected, providing access to every room in the inn. They crawled swiftly to its end, which led to the bespectacled innkeeper's office. Inside, monitors displayed surveillance footage from their room, and shelves were lined with videotapes. Amy spotted a landline phone and immediately dialed the police. However, she barely managed to say a few words before the innkeeper and the masked assailants returned. The couple had no choice but to retreat back into the tunnel. In their haste, Amy left the phone receiver off the hook. The innkeeper soon noticed footprints near the tunnel entrance and quickly deduced that David and Amy had been there. He also found the still active phone call and pulled the cord from the wall, pocketing it. He then sent the two masked assailants into the tunnel to track the couple. Meanwhile, David and Amy reached the inn's small shop, a room without surveillance cameras. They overturned a shelf to block the tunnel entrance. After all the chaos, Amy was on the verge of a breakdown. David patiently comforted her, and in this moment of crisis, they reconciled, realizing they still deeply loved each other. They promised to let go of past grievances and rebuild their life together if they could survive this ordeal. At that moment, headlights illuminated the courtyard. This time, it was a police car and an officer stepped out, a middle-aged man. Amy's hope reignited, but David urged caution. He worried the officer might be another buyer of the gruesome tapes. Fortunately, David was wrong. The officer had been dispatched after Amy's garbled phone call. He questioned the innkeeper who lied, claiming no guests had stayed recently. The officer, being thorough, decided to inspect the rooms. The innkeeper feigned forgetfulness, claiming he needed to retrieve the keys and left abruptly. The officer tried the doorknob and found it unlocked. Inside, he noticed signs of a struggle: broken glass, damaged electronics, and light spilling from the adjoining room's door. He opened it and entered the very room David and Amy had been trapped in. The floor was littered with shattered glass, the trapdoor to the tunnel was ajar, and the TV was still playing horrifying footage of the murders. Sensing something was gravely wrong, the officer drew his gun and cautiously retreated to the courtyard. By this time, one of the masked attackers had reached the shop's tunnel entrance and was pushing against the overturned shelf. David struggled to hold it in place. Just as he was about to lose his grip, Amy spotted the officer outside. Confirming he was a real cop, they ran to him for help. The three retreated to the police car, but it wouldn't start. The innkeeper had cut the wires. The officer got out to investigate, only to be ambushed and killed by one of the masked attackers. The innkeeper emerged calm and smug, herding David and Amy back into their room. He wasn't in a rush to kill them. He wanted more footage of their suffering. Even in this dire situation, David refused to give up. He noticed a ceiling hatch in the adjacent, unmonitored room that led to an attic crawl space. With the attackers busy dealing with the police car and body, David broke the bathroom window, tore a piece of Amy's clothing, and draped it on the frame to fake her escape through the window. He then hid Amy in the attic and gave her strict instructions. No matter what happened, she must remain silent to avoid detection. Meanwhile, David devised a bold plan. He planned to sneak to the bar and grab a gun he had noticed mounted on the wall when they first checked in. However, before he could leave the room, a masked assailant burst in and stabbed him. To protect Amy's hiding place, David crawled outside despite his injuries and collapsed. The innkeeper, holding a handheld camera, gleefully filmed David's final moments of struggle. The innkeeper then entered the room and spotted the fabric Amy had left on the window frame. Assuming she had escaped, he didn't continue searching the room. Heartbroken but determined, Amy waited in silence until dawn. When the house quieted, Amy carefully climbed down from the attic and sprinted to the innkeeper's car. By sheer luck, the keys were still in the ignition. She started the car, but one of the masked attackers spotted her and leapt onto the roof, smashing the sunroof to force her to stop. Another assailant emerged from the building, heading toward her. Amy floored the accelerator, ramming the second attacker and crashing the car through a wall. The airbags deployed, saving her life, while both masked men were killed in the collision. Amy stumbled out of the car and rushed back to the office to call for help, only to remember the phone lines were gone. She turned to the gun behind the bar instead. Just as she grabbed it, the innkeeper appeared and strangled her with a telephone cord. The gun fell to the ground as he ruthlessly beat her. Weakened and in agony, Amy found an opportunity to kick the innkeeper to the floor. She scrambled for the gun and shot him multiple times, finally ending his reign of terror. With the immediate danger over, Amy ran to David's lifeless body, overcome with grief. Suddenly, David stirred. He wasn't dead, just unconscious. His brush with death had spared him. Amy, relieved, searched the innkeeper's body for the phone cord and called for help. After surviving a harrowing night, David and Amy reconciled, vowing to rebuild their marriage. This film is one of the scariest horror movies I've seen. I know it's kind of cheesy, but the idea is so claustrophobic and unsettling. What's even more chilling is that the movie shares similarities with a real-life case detailed in a 2016 New Yorker article. The story involves a motel owner who secretly spied on his guests through hidden crawl spaces and vents, even witnessing a murder he never reported. Knowing such events actually happen makes this movie all the more haunting.